Moved to Japan and found love, my journey with a Japanese girl. I moved to Japan a long time ago, left everything behind, bought a one-way ticket, and settled here. A couple of years later, I met her, a Japanese girl with a sharp tongue and a gaze that gave me chills. We've been together for a while now, but I'm still a foreigner with her passport stamped on my heart. Ask me anything. How did you first meet your girlfriend? It happened in Tokyo, in a crowded diner near the station. I was sitting with a bowl of ramen, trying not to spill sauce on my shirt, when she burst in with a friend, hair messy, coffee in hand. She sat next to me because there were no other seats. I accidentally bumped her elbow and spilled her coffee on her bag. She looked at me like I was an idiot and said, "Are you always this clumsy?" I mumbled something in broken Japanese and she laughed. Then she wiped her bag with a napkin and asked where I was from. That's how it started. That evening smelled like fried fish and her perfume, sharp, with a hint of lemon. I still remember how she pointed at a stain on my shirt and said, "You need to learn how to eat." What was the most awkward moment with her because of the language barrier? One time I tried to make a joke in Japanese, said something about her hair, like, "It's like seaweed in soup." I meant it to sound cute, but she froze, stared at me like I was crazy, and asked, "Do you really think that's a compliment?" I started explaining, but she was already frowning. Turns out, I mixed up words, and it sounded like I called her hair slimmy. She stayed silent for 5 minutes, then threw a pillow at me and said, "Learn the language while I'm still nice." I was blushing, sweating, and the room smelled like the herbal tea she was drinking while I stammered my excuses. How did her family react when you first visited their home? It was a nightmare. I showed up with a box of sweets, like she told me to, at their house in the suburbs. Her father opened the door, short, wearing glasses, with a face like I was there to collect taxes. Her mother peeked out from the kitchen, nodded, but didn't smile. I took off my shoes, nearly tripped over the threshold, and her younger brother immediately asked, "What? He doesn't speak our language." I greeted them in Japanese. Her father grunted, "Well, he's trying." We sat at the table, ate soup, and I felt their eyes on me. Her mother later whispered to her, "Foreigners aren't reliable." I heard but kept quiet. I left feeling like they'd inspected me like damaged goods. What's the most annoying thing about her Japanese habits? Every morning, she folds the blanket into a perfect square, even if we're running late. I once said, "Just leave it. Let's go." She looked at me like I was a barbarian and replied, "Order matters." I grabbed my jacket, but she spent another 10 minutes straightening the corners. It also drives me nuts how she washes dishes right after eating. Even if it's just a coffee cup. The water sloshes, the sponge squeaks, and I'm sitting there thinking, can't it wait? One time, I hid a plate to test her. She found it within an hour and scolded me like a kid. Daily life is tough. What was the first gift she gave you, and what did you think? She handed me a small box 2 months after we met. Inside was a keychain, a wooden cat with a crooked smile. She said, "It's a Maneki, Nico, for luck." I turned it over in my hands. It smelled like varnish and fresh wood shavings. I thought, seriously, is this a hint that I need luck? I smiled, thanked her, but in my head I was like, does she really think I believe in this stuff? I hung it on my keys to avoid upsetting her. A week later, she noticed and clapped her hands like a kid. It clearly meant a lot to her. What food does she make that you still can't stomach? Natto. That sticky, slimy stuff smells like wet socks and rotten cheese. Every morning, she pulls it out of the fridge, mixes it with sauce, and the kitchen fills with this sour, heavy stench. Like something died in the jar. I've tried it 5 times, it hits my mouth, and my throat closes like I'm eating glue. She watches, laughs, and says, "You're just not used to it." Once, I hid my portion in a napkin. She found it and made me finish it while she ate her rice with that garbage. She says it's healthy. I'd rather eat raw fish than that fermented nightmare. Even her cat turns away when she opens the jar. What was your worst screw up on a date by Japanese standards? I took her to a cafe and ordered pizza for us to share. Back home, that's normal. You grab a slice and eat with your hands. But she sat there, watching me tear off a piece, and suddenly said, "What? You're not going to cut it?" I shrugged, but she pulled out a knife and fork and started slicing her piece like a surgeon. The waitress glanced over, and the couple at the next table whispered. Then she said, "People don't eat like that here. It's rude." I finished my slice with my hands, but she was cold as the soup in that bowl all evening. It smelled like cheese in her disapproval. At home, she lectured me for an hour about proper behavior. Honestly, though, it's more her family's habit. I've seen plenty of people eat pizza with their hands. How does she react when you curse in your native language? At first, she got scared. Once, I was yelling at my phone when the internet cut out, cussing up a storm. She stood in the doorway, eyes wide, and asked, "Are you mad at me?" I explained it was just emotions, not about her. Now, when I curse, she sits next to me, pours tea, and stays quiet. One time, I went off about a broken toaster, and she suddenly said, "Your language sounds like a saw." Then she laughed and added, "But I'm used to it." Her calmness pisses me off even more. I'm shouting, and she's sitting there like a statue with her teacup. It smells like green tea. What did she say about your appearance the first time? We were sitting in a park, eating ice cream, when she looked at me and said, "Your nose is big, like a statue in a temple." I nearly choked. It sounded like an insult, but she was smiling like it was a compliment. Then she added, "And your hair's light, like a doll's." I asked, "Is that bad?" She shrugged and said, "No, just weird." Her voice had this childish tone, but I spent the rest of the day touching my nose, wondering if it was really that huge. Now she sometimes pokes my nose and giggles, like it's her private joke. What Japanese custom did she make you learn for her sake? Bowing. She said I looked like an uncultured foreigner. When I just nodded my head. We stood in her apartment, and she made me spend an hour bending my back, 30 degrees for acquaintances, 45 for elders. I was sweating, my back ached, and she circled me, saying, "Lower, smoother." Once I nearly face planted on the rug, and she laughed, saying, "Now you're almost human." Then she dragged me to the neighbors to practice. I bowed to an old lady with flowers, and she whispered, "You're still like a robot." Now I bow to everyone, even the cat, so she doesn't nag. Was there a moment when you thought she'd leave you because of cultural differences? Yeah, when I blew up at her at home. Back home, people yell, slam doors. It's normal. But I raised my voice because she folded my clothes again, and I couldn't find them, even though I asked her not to touch them. She froze, then said quietly, "We don't do that here." She walked into the other room and shut the door. I thought that was it. She wouldn't come back. I sat there, listening to the clock tick, smelling her lavender laundry detergent. An hour later, she came out, put the kettle on, and said, "Yelling's pointless. I'm not a dog." I apologized, but in my head, I was thinking, she's too Japanese for this. How does she act when you argue in public? She turns to ice. Once, we fought in the subway. I wanted to sit, and she said I should give the seat to an old man. I muttered something loudly, and she stepped away, crossed her arms, and stared at the floor. People glanced over, someone coughed. She didn't say a word until we got off. Then, on the street, she hissed, "You're embarrassing both of us." Her face was pale as chalk, and her fingers gripped her bag so hard her knuckles cracked. At home, she was silent for 2 hours until I brought her coffee. For her, arguments are silence, but I'm used to shouting. What's the weirdest question she asked about your homeland? She asked, Is it true that everyone there eats bloody meat every morning?" I was holding a beer and nearly choked. I told her that's nonsense, but she pressed, "What about with a knife in hand, like in movies?" I cracked up, but she was dead serious, like I was hiding some ritual. I explained that breakfast is coffee and bread, not a slaughterhouse. She nodded but later added, "Then why are you all so loud?" She still thinks I'm holding back about the meat. What does she do at home that still feels bizarre to you? She sniffs her food before eating. Soup, rice, even an apple, she leans in and sniffs like a dog. I asked, "Why?" She said, "To know the taste beforehand." Also, every evening, she wipes down door handles with a cloth and some spray. The chemical smell lingers while I'm trying to watch TV. Once, I said, "It's not dirty," and she replied, "You can't see germs." I shrugged, but she still goes around with that cloth like a health inspector. What did she do that showed she really loves you? Last winter, I got sick with the flu, fever at 102, throat like sandpaper. She came home from work, saw me sweating on the couch, and went straight to the kitchen without a word. An hour later, she brought a bowl of hot soup with ginger and garlic. The smell was so strong my eyes watered. She sat next to me, put a damp cloth on my forehead, and stayed while I ate, even though she was exhausted. That night, she kept getting up to check if I was breathing. In the morning, I woke up, and she was asleep on the floor by the couch so she wouldn't catch it but didn't leave me. That's when I knew it wasn't just habit. She's really holding on to me. Even if she doesn't say it out loud. How did she react when you first stayed over at her place? I came over after a bar. We were both tipsy. She said, "Stay, it's late." I crashed on her couch, and she brought me a blanket and pillow, folded like they were from a hotel. Then she stood in the doorway, watching me settle in. I asked, "What?" She muttered, "You probably snore." In the morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sizzle of a pan. She was frying eggs for me while sipping tea. When I got up, she pointed at me and said, "You took up the whole couch. I slept on the floor." Her voice was grumpy, but her eyes were warm. What does she say when you try cooking your own food for her? I eat pretty much anything, honestly. But once, I wanted to make a meat soup, the kind I always have. The kitchen smelled like boiled potatoes and dill. I slaved over the stove for 2 hours. She sat down, looked at the red broth in her bowl, and said, "Is this soup or paint?" She took a spoonful, grimaced, and added, "Too greasy. I don't eat this." I said people love it back home, and she shrugged. She ate it anyway but complained all evening about garlic breath. Now, when I cook my stuff, she stands nearby and says, "Use less oil. I'm not a cow." Her face scrunches up, but she eats it, probably to avoid hurting my feelings. How does she feel about you never being one of them? In Japan, she doesn't care. I once told her that Japanese people always see me as an outsider, even with her ring on my finger. She shrugged and said, "You're mine, that's enough for me." But one time, a neighbor called me a foreigner in front of her, and she cut him off sharp. "He lives here, same as you." Her voice was like a blade, cold, precise. At home, she poured me tea and said, "Don't worry about it. They're just dumb." She doesn't dig into my feelings about it, but I can tell it bugs her when people rub my passport in my face. Her calmness is like armor, and I cling to it. What did you notice in her behavior that you didn't see in girls back home? She goes quiet when she's mad. Back home, girls yell, slam doors, but she just shuts down. Once, I was an hour late. She was sitting on the couch, staring at her phone, and the silence was so loud my ears rang. I asked, "You okay?" She nodded but didn't look at me. Then she got up, put her cup away, and went to bed. In the morning, she made me coffee like nothing happened, but I knew she was still upset. Also, she never hugs first. Waits for me to make the move. She's always got my back, even in small things. I don't know if she really believes in me that much, or if it's just how things are done. But it's super motivating. What Japanese holiday did you celebrate together first? Hanami? Cherry blossom viewing. She dragged me to a park, handed me a beer and a bento with rice and fish. Crowds everywhere, everyone snapping pics of the trees. And I'm sitting on a blanket thinking, why all the fuss over flowers? We sat there for 3 hours until I got cold. Her cheeks were pink from the wind, and I thought she looked beautiful, even when she was grumbling about the idiots around us. What gesture or habit of hers still gets on your nerves? She taps her fingers on the table when she's thinking. We're eating dinner, and suddenly it starts. Tap, 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 like a metronome. I once said, "Stop, it's annoying," and she looked at me and said, "It helps me focus." Now I keep quiet, but every time I hear it, I want to get up and leave. Also, she rolls my socks into balls, even though I've asked her 100 times to leave them alone. I open the drawer, and there they are, these little bundles smelling like laundry detergent and her stubbornness. I ask, "Why?" She says, "It's neater. I've given up, but it still bugs me." Was there ever a time her friends tried to break you up? Yeah, her friend got drunk at a party and started saying, "He's a foreigner. You won't last long." We were in a bar. My girl stayed quiet at first, then snapped, "Shut up, he's my choice." The friend blushed and went outside to smoke. I asked if that happens a lot, and she said, "Sometimes, but I don't care." She grumbled all night about her friends butting in. It left a bad taste. Her friends still give me side When I'm around. How does she react to your jokes that Japanese people don't get? I once said, "You're like a cat, always off on your own." Back home, that's sweet, but she stared at me like I was an idiot and asked, "Is that an insult?" I explained it was about independence, but she still frowned. Then she said, "Too complicated." Now, when I crack my kind of joke, she either nods or says, "Not funny, but keep trying." One time I made a quip about her boss, and she stayed silent for a minute before forcing a smile. Tight, like rubber. Her face is a mirror if she doesn't get it. You can tell instantly. What did she say when you first told her you loved her? We were walking home after a movie, it was drizzling. I stopped and said, "I love you." She froze, looked at me like I was nuts, and said, "You're too fast." I waited for her to say something back, but she just kept walking. At home, I asked, "What about you?" She shrugged and muttered, "Prove it with actions, words are empty." I nearly lost it but stayed quiet. Then she brought me tea and sat close, silent but near. That was her answer, and I accepted it. How does she handle your habits that feel foreign to her? I love blasting music,